All right, thank you, Sushil, and once again, good morning, everyone. Um, so for today's continuation of the book of Second Samuel, we'll get into chapter 15, and I think it's a continuation of what we have been seeing, at least from a standpoint of what's happening in the life of David. Um, Chapter 13, obviously, was where we saw. I guess I can go all the way back to chapter 11, where um, David had his fallings. Uh, he fell from the grace. Essentially, he did sin. He went with Bathsheba. He fell to his senses. Essentially, he forgot the divine way he needed to be, and also the fact that he was anointed king from God, and he needed to set a benchmark for the people to essentially follow. Right. We also saw right after that in 12 how Nathan rebukes David and tells him all the fact that he had sinned and the fact that his sins will have consequences, and he actually lays it down. And I think we'll get into that a little bit here again. 13 is where we saw all the prophecies that Nathan laid out coming into action. He talked about how the enemy will be from within his own family, and his sons essentially is now turning and coming and fulfilling those prophecies. And I think today's story also about Absalom is essentially in that vein. 14 is where we saw without consequence again Absalom is allowed to come back to Jerusalem, and in 15 is where Absalom, ignoring the fact that his father did allow him to come back, he is conspiring against him. When we look at this chapters, I think a couple of parallels we can obviously keep in mind as we look through. Just this slide obviously is just a recap of what happened in 14, but just to set the context, there's a lot of parallels we can draw. Obviously, we have talked again and again about how David's life mimics what's going to happen when Jesus comes in New Testament, right? We can draw clear parallels in this chapter also. So if David represents what Jesus Christ is going to do several years later on, being part of his family, we can also say that Absalom essentially is mimicking what is against or what is opposite of a good king. In a way, sort of mimicking what an antichrist might look like, right? So keep that in mind, as well as some of the actions, when David is confronted with this, big issue of, his own son trying to throw his kingdom out. What does it do? For example, going feeding towards Mount Olive, and then the parallels you can draw with the last days of Jesus when he was betrayed as well, and then he has also goes and prays in Mount Olive. Really, those are very clear and obvious parallels that you can draw between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Just to have a quick revisit of what happened in 14, right? Joab obviously understood, even though Joab has his problems and he was himself a murderer, but he was a servant of David, a true servant. I understood that um, David was longing for Absalom, even though his son did do murder his firstborn, but he was longing for him because he was in exile in a foreign land, essentially in Syria, right? Since he wanted to bring about that conversation, because nothing was happening for the last 2 years, he brought about this woman, or it's been called as a wise woman from Tekoa, to present a narrative in front of the king, David, to make him think about, or maybe even invoke an action from David to bring back Absalom. Right? And so he was more or less successful in doing so. I think I'm going to go into detail of that. I think Sushil covered it very well, very good notes. I was going over that last evening. Um, as well as, based upon this narrative and this presentation, Absalom is brought back to Jerusalem, but he was given that condition of you cannot be in front of your own father, right? So he was brought to Jerusalem, staying away from his father for another 2 years, 3 years, whatever the timeline was, right? And I think the way in which this whole thing, Joab actually went ahead and after that second year, right? How what Absalom did to Joab is again amazing, right? He actually, to get his attention, burnt his fields to again for him to make an infraction between these two people, right? David and Absalom. So as we enter into, I think the closing of that chapter 14 is that the king has kissed Absalom essentially. So after the 2 years of hiatus of not seeing his own father, he actually welcomes him back into his presence. I wouldn't say that they were meeting of hearts per se, right? There was not like emotionally he just, his father just accepted him as is. This was more ceremonial, I would think, because there is no mention of feelings or emotions or anything of that sort in the Bible. And I think that probably was one of the bigger triggers as to why he did what he did, starting from Samuel 15 onwards. So there was, even though a ceremonial acceptance, there was really not like a father-son. So father did not say yes. The king would have said yes, but the father himself was still, I'm sure, uh, highly bothered by the fact that he has murdered his firstborn son, and he did not let him even do what the king had to do, right? The fact that he was still not going to punish is also being seen by the rest of the his kingdom in his inactiveness, both for Tamar as well as now again with Absalom, of not bringing home the judgment that is required in such scenarios. These are all punishable acts by Mosaic laws, and here is the king, who is anointed king, really not doing his job of making sure that the judgment is passed on to the people who are perpetrating these kind of crimes. Um, I think 15 also then goes into in great detail about the planning that Absalom does, because obviously he is quite. I think we'll grapple a little bit on that question about why is Absalom really upset about whatever is happening around him. But he is upset. He really literally hates his father. He has decided to really do really strategize and do things which is really negative for his father, really take his shoes, become the king, become the judge of that land essentially, right? And I think he's transforming into this wicked individual, right? So in chapter 14, I think you would have seen that he's been described as, he's very he's a good looking fellow, he has long hairs, he's well kept, he's most handsome, there is no blemish from top to bottom. That's what the description of Absalom is. And then in 15, now you see this sudden transformation into a exceptionally deceitful person, very cunning, very knowledgeable from a standpoint of how to hit at his very popular father, who is the king of Israel, right? His popularity is also very large. So what he does is really amazing, and we'll get into that as well. And then he also tries to tell his father that he wants to go to Hebron to fulfill one of the vows he took while he was in exile in Geshur. And this was another way, even though he said he had made promise to God that if he ever gets to come back to Jerusalem, he has to do this ceremony out in Hebron. And I think that also is having a lot of significance, and I think we'll go into that a little bit later on as well, right? So overall, I think his planning is systematic. His planning is, he's very patient with his planning. It took almost four years for him to win the hearts of the Israelite men, and he's very deliberate. Everything he does, the show he builds around, or maybe the noise he creates around his presence, is purely to win over people, not necessarily win over their hearts. I mean, it's just literally people doing things to win, or just our minds. We are pleased with certain people and we go after them. So he's creating that sort of a pull within himself, using his charm, using pompous and show, essentially, and then the fact that he's out there to help people, right? And to give that feeling to the people of Israel. And I think there is a oversight missing from King David himself, for his administration. Maybe because of his sins, he's burdened heavily with the sins. He's not taking care of his kingdom. There is an account of how people are coming to get justice from the king, and then literally there is nobody appointed, or maybe a judge or somebody who can actually delegate or at least deliver these judgments to people who are coming with problems. So Absalom, understood and isolated that specific troubled area, and he zeroed in on it, and then he hit hard exactly where it hurts, right? So my point being that he's doing all these things. We get a picture of a person who is deliberate. We get a picture of a person who is smart, politically savvy. He's patient to destroy his enemy. Essentially, he has considered his father himself as his enemy, and he is very patient, and he is really going after David, right? And I think David realizes it at a later point. Now, one of the themes I want to just keep you in mind is about, this almost he was, almost he was successful in dislodging David from his kingship, essentially, right? This is as close as David has come to losing his kingdom, bar none. I mean, he has never came this close to losing his kingdom to even to an enemy, right? His own son is most close. Now, in this chaos, and it is a very chaotic situation, not only because of the coup that is ongoing, but also because of the fact that David decides to take his loyals and leave Jerusalem in herds, right? That's a logistical nightmare, as you can imagine. And then he had to do that very quickly, and then he had no literally a place or location he could actually go and be safe. And so that's a very chaotic situation, not just for the king, and also the people who are following him, people who have actually, who are Israelites, as well as we'll read how some of these people were from Gath. They were actually Philistines who actually came out of Philistine to be with. They were mercenaries essentially, but they actually believed in David, and then they decided to come along with him, right? So it's a huge set of people who have complete trust in David. He is burdened by that fact, and but still he has to make that decision to flee Jerusalem, because that seems to be the best decision at that point for him. But in this chaos also, the God is still sovereign, right? I mean, this is really an execution of what God gave as a prophecy through Nathan, right? This is the consequence of the sin. Now, in this situation, David definitely has repented, and I think that's where we go into the first question. He's fully repented about his sin, right? He has asked pardon to God, right? So he is pardoned. He's not been put to death. That's what we learn in the exchange between him and Nathan, right? But obviously there is a consequence to what he has done. Essentially killing killing somebody and marrying that person's wife just because of lust is a punishable act, right? So I think in chapter 12, this were laid out as to what exactly were the punishments, and I think we'll go into that in the next slide. But really, he's, even though he's okay with God, he's closer to God, but he has to now suffer the consequence. And I think chapter 15 is really where it rubber meets the road, as they say, right? The sin and the consequences really hitting home. He knew it in his heart that at some point he has to face the music, but 15 is where his own son really forces him into, sort of makes him feel that pain of what the consequence of sin would be, right? So the first question I want to maybe have us look into is like, see the way in which Absalom went about creating this coup is, I don't want to be, I don't want to say this is a brilliant thing, but it really is, right? I mean, because you're talking about David, very established king. Yes, he has fallen into sin. Yes, it has been noticed by his kingdom. Maybe his presence as a king has been diminished because of his own action, but still he is an anointed king. He has won victories for the people of Israel. He continues to be a strong king. He has the support of the strong men of Israel. He has loyalists who are absolutely with him all the time without questioning, right? So he has a lot of things which are still going for him. he might be diminished from his presence because of his sins. But really, what Absalom does and the patience that he shows to get back at um, David is something to learn from. Because this is real life. To me, this is how we have false prophets that comes about, right? It's really where we as individuals, we as Christians need to learn from these strategies that Absalom has deployed to win the hearts of quote unquote God's own people, right? So these are again God's own people who are following like a sheep. Absalom's, pomp. They are dazzled by Absalom's pomp and show. Essentially, they are dazzled by the fact that he is coming across as somebody who can help them. So there are some practical lessons, and I think it's worth for us to all discover that together and maybe go about looking at this question as a group. So I'll take a pause here for a second. Maybe some of you can come on mic and express some of your views around this, because I think there are like very specific steps that he takes. And I think I have made a quick table later on, but I just want to discuss this question.
Okay. Yeah. Just to share a thought, like this, even I was thinking that there's a lot to learn from that other perspective like Santosh said, we know Israel has a inclination to go after the tall, handsome leader, someone who looks like a leader. When they were to choose and not abide by God's choice, they flipped towards the one who looked like a leader. We saw that in the case of Saul, and we see that happening again in the case of Absalom. Absalom has a good understanding of how their mind and heart works, Israel's mind and heart, and he's taking time patiently. He's a man with a lot of patience, right? He waited 2 years to take his revenge on Amnon. Yeah. He waited 2 years in exile, many years in exile. And then he's strategizing this for 4 years. So we see that, and his target clearly are the Israelites. He has a good understanding of how they think. So there is a lot to think about here when it comes to discernment, right? God has already made it known that David's child is going to be a successor. And there's a hint to that it's going to be Solomon when after the first child of Bathsheba dies, that Solomon is the one that the Lord loves. And Absalom is actually, I don't know whether the people know that, but Absalom is trying to make sure that it's him next. And he's not willing to wait, like the prodigal son. He's not willing to wait for the inheritance. He's seizing the inheritance in his own way. And the way he goes about it is he's actually winning the people over because they can be won over. So this is, I was thinking, a very interesting lesson for us, that discernment thing. That's what I was just picking on what Michael said when in this chat and when he was sharing, how important it is to discern, right? And not get caught by external appearances. When we are not guided by God's wisdom, we are so easily swayed by things that look so attractive. Eve ate the fruit because it looked good to her eyes. Israel is choosing Absalom because he looks good, not really looks good. He's behaving well, right? He's approachable. He's doing all the right things. So how our children are not going to follow the very obviously evil, mostly. Sometimes it may happen, the very out and out bad influences. But the seductive quality of the influences that do not look so bad is where problems occur. So that spirit of discernment, the importance of imparting that to our children as parents comes through here. A lot of the time our children, and we also can be like Israel, right? So that's just a thought I wanted to share from this portion.
Yeah. No, I think like really amazing points, and thanks for bringing that the discernment piece home. Really, I think I'm just gonna maybe I'll move forward at this point. So it's necessary to to answer the above question, and it's also necessary to really understand what are some of the causes for Absalom to be rebellious, because I think the point has been made that he's just about doing everything in his wisdom, if you may, to make sure that he does overthrow his own father and becomes. So that's a certain level of animosity, right? I mean, I'm sure that if a regular Philistine or somebody who is a known enemy of Israel, who is sitting there and sitting and plotting, that makes much more sense than within your own family, your own son, taking all these efforts, right? I think somebody talked about how he presents himself, all these kind of different things that he does, and every moment of his waking hours essentially goes into this plot, right? That's the person we are seeing, and so there has to be some reason as to why he is this way, right? I think I just jotted down few, nothing spectacular, but it's just for our reference, right? So I think I talked about how, as a father, you kept David kept on presenting Absalom with, not just Absalom, all of his sons, right? Set for bad examples, and this clearly there is a, I mean, of course, he is a good king. He is a just king. He is a anointed king. But obviously, he has not been a good father. Maybe not a good husband as well. With all these different wives he has, right? So what does the son sees, right? I mean, he sees a person who is violating Mosaic laws day in day out with absolute impunity, right? There's no repercussions even to his father, right? So there is no guidance, there is no guide rails, if you may, right? And inside which he or she needs to perform, right? So there is nothing that is stopping him from just acting upon what he feels, and that's really the danger here. I think that's one of the things, right? People getting swayed by all these false prophets comes from the fact that our propensity to just do what we feel is right, as opposed to what is actually right, right? What is actually holy, right? We don't think about what is holy. We don't think about what is, right thing to do. We just do it, right? And that's because we don't always have these guardrails around us, right? I think this is clearly the case for Absalom, right? So I think many wives, as a matter of fact, I think that's the violation of Deuteronomy 17:17. He shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turns away. Second is, he is married to Ahinoam, right? So wife of Saul, and then of course his first wife, Mika. So you are marrying the daughter and the wife itself. I mean, how horrendous that sounds from a king who is anointed by God, right? If a man takes a woman and her mother also, it is depravity. That's what the Bible says. He shall be burnt with fire, and there will be no depravity among you, right? So literally, God is telling to blot away the depravity. Don't have that in your presence, and that's the father that Absalom is handed down, right? It's nothing to do with Absalom. It's everything to do with what David is creating within his house. And here is really a message for fathers, I would say, right? I'm sure mothers as well, but here really, for fathers, it's something that we have to take it more seriously. We have to be disciplined to impart discipline, right? You cannot just do whatever you feel like and then suddenly imagine our kids, next generation, whatever, you are modeling those things for our kids. We are modeling those for kids in the church. We are modeling for anybody at work, right? So these are all being avenues or platforms in which you, whether you like it or not, have to be Christian each day, every moment. It's not just a thing which we do and say on when we discuss these biblical studies or maybe at church. It is to be done every time, everywhere, right? Then, of course, the abuse of power. He's seeing his power, constantly abusing power, right? I mean, obviously, killing of Uriah, right? And then, of course, marrying Bathsheba, no consequences to himself, right? Obviously, Exodus 20:13. These are all 10 commandments, essentially, 13, 14, and 17, right? That has to do with, not coveting your neighbor's wife, not killing, not committing adultery, right? All this has been blown past with no repercussions. That's what his son sees, right? David did put and of course, I think somebody already brought this point. Literally no effort, right? Once his son is gone into exile, even though he's burning inside, he's longing for him, but he's not doing anything to make that situation just. That would mean actually him punishing Absalom or bringing him back. He almost like, it's like, I just let go of my son and never go back, right? And just, it's, I think that's not the what Jesus Christ is teaching. And Jesus Christ talks about a shepherd who goes back for the last sheep, right? even if it's just one sheep out of the hundreds, right? So that's not what he's demonstrating. He is demonstrating what he thinks is right, as opposed to what is holy and right in front of God, right? Of course, he fails to act several times. First of all, my heart goes to Tamar, right? I mean, that's his daughter. What complete inaction when such a atrocity has happened to her, right? Then, of course, as I said, once he comes back, Absalom comes back to his kingdom also again. He's not allowed to see his father's face for another 3 years. Sorry, 2 years. He just stays in Jerusalem. He doesn't know whether his father is okay. He doesn't know whether his father is wanting to see him, right? So this is something which can do a number on anybody, right? And if you are doled out this kind of a um, response from your own father, right? I think that's something that would hit you very hard, right? That's one thing. Second is, I just jot down few things. I think I just on this left hand side, I just put out what exactly some of the items that we talked about, right? So, for example, of course, he is a handsome person. There's a talk about how long his hair can get. Ultimately, that leads to his death in chapter 18. That's a different thing, but it's a long hair. He cuts it once in a year. He actually, it's a royal value to his hair, certain number of shekels, I suppose, right? So he's vain. He's literally vain, and he's too much into himself. That's Bible to actually note that about him tells me that he is really proud of the fact that he is blemishless from top to bottom, right? So what's the life lessons? Of course, if you are always having this, hey, who looks good, who speaks well, whose English is better, or whose Malayalam is better, who can quote the Bible verses worse, all these kind of things, right? Which is outward, right? A demonstration, a presentation, if you may, right? And that's what impresses you. Then beware, right? Appearance can be deceptive, right? Absalom provided himself a chariot horse. I think somebody brought this up, right? To create that aura around yourself. I am successful. I am somebody. I can help you. You come to me, right? You don't need to go to the real God, real king. I am the king, right? So deflecting people from everything. So everything that glitters is really not gold, right? He put up get up early and stand at the gates. We have to remember, the enemy who is tugging at your soul, trying to separate you from God, is really hard at work. He's constantly at work. He's tireless. That's something that we need to understand. It's not just that, he's going to just do one attempt at you, two attempt at you. He's going to be tireless. He's going to wake up early. And maybe the first thing he gets at your heart is through your cell phone, possibly, right? Maybe send out a message which is like, maybe just makes you forget about doing that first prayer in the morning, or maybe some bad news from the work, whatever it is, right? Whatever distraction there is to be presented, he's hard at work. We got to remember that, right? Of course, people who are downtrodden, who are troubled, and somebody gets you help. I remember, I know we're running out of time a little bit here, but surely I want to say that, simple things, right? I went to do my license, right? And I am really not good at, was literally zero on Kannada, right? And so I was in Koramangala. For some reason, I had to go there for get it done because I had an out-of-state license. And I literally, a person was there who was, I reached up to him, and he was willing to help. And I literally thought he is literally the face of God, because I was getting so much pushback. I could not get the system to work for me, right? And that's the feeling, right? I mean, if you're troubled, you're going somewhere, and there is this person who is obviously he's a prince. He has a big entourage around him. He looks good, and that person is ready to help you, to get you justice. Possibly, maybe some land dispute. Somebody is not letting you farm in their lands, something which is really meaningful to your livelihood, right? And then this person says, no need for king, I will help you. You will gravitate towards him. Doesn't mean that you love him from your heart. It's simply that in your mind, he is good enough. He is better than the king. He is better than our God, because he is able to help you in this world. And that's what we gravitate towards, right? Okay, and I think that's the point here. Only he can help and nobody else. And he kisses people, right, who are kneeling down behind him. He is showing how humble he is, right? And in that way, he's able to steal the hearts of men of Israel, right? And so last thing is about the his choice of places, right? He is actually wanting to go to Hebron. These are not chance, right? And these are not something that something that just happens. Hebron obviously, he is really the where was the capital for Israel, right where David was anointed, where he was born. Absalom was born, right? As well as he understood the fact that there is some anger within the people in and around that Hebron, because of the shifting of the capital from Hebron to Jerusalem. So he understood that where will he get the maximum traction, or people who are ready to jump ships, if you may, right? Same with Ahithophel, right? So he is, by some account, the grandfather of Bathsheba, right? So he understood that, and he is the most trusted, the advisor for David. So he gets both. Once he is getting somebody who is in the inside circle of David, and then he knows that for sure that he is upset because of Bathsheba, the treatment that Bathsheba got from David. So he is able to. So sometimes the friends who have some gripes against you, right? It's easy to see how they can become a big liability for you, right? And really a tool in the hands of the enemy, right? So very obvious things, not something earth shattering, but I just thought it's interesting to sort of just lay it out and just look at it and try to see connect these two approaches and the life lessons, right? So in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going here. Second question is about David is still a powerful king, right? I mean, there is but we also see how Absalom is gaining traction with the people of Israel. He is turning their hearts. He is creating an impression that he is better option, maybe a false option. Of course, Israel doesn't know about that false option. He is a false option. He is a false king. He's a false shepherd. Almost, I want to say, he is a resemblance of Antichrist, right? This is literally giving us the impression, or at least we are supposed to understand from this, that this will happen. This is written down in several places, right? Now, obviously, this is something that will come to fruition as the time comes, right? So he is doing all those kind of he is pitching himself as the next best option, or for that matter, the only option, without actually somebody else again brought it up, without directly going and attacking David. So it's literally a win-win situation, right? I'm not attacking David. If I attack David, I have a alibi in a way, right? I also have a reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. Obviously, I have built up the coalition within the kingdom of people who are now wanting him as at least somebody who can solve their problems, and possibly as a king and a judge, right? So he is patiently have done that 4 years working on the people, and then now he is requesting for him to go to Hebron, so that he can do this ceremony, which is a vow ceremony essentially, to thank God for letting him come back to Jerusalem. This is from the times, according to quote unquote, he promised that when he was in exile in Gesher, right? So the question is, so once he gets to um, uh, so sorry, once he gets to Hebron, he obviously has sent out a lot of secret messengers throughout the tribes, right? To tell them that as soon as the ceremony does happen in Hebron, now everybody is supposed to claim that now there is a new king in Hebron, right? And that is Absalom. So that he does. So that's really the agenda. It's not about giving thanks to Lord or anything, because he could have very well done that over in Jerusalem, right? There is an argument that maybe the main temple was really in that part of the world at that time, but this is just an excuse. We know that because his intention was never to do anything but this, right? He also, again, I think pulled in Ahithophel, who was the advisor to David, and so just to make sure that that plan goes through well, right? So the question is, why did David, now this is the background, and then of course as soon as David hears about all this, he decides to just leave Jerusalem. So Just wanted to explore, what do you think it is the case? Why did not he use his strongmen of Israel and just fight it out, right? What was the problem in that? What was his thought processes at that time? Yeah, thanks, Minnie, for bringing that, and Sushil as well to expand on it for sure. I think that's really the centerpiece of this, right? Why he did what he did, and I think all points point towards that. But really, that's the issue, right? The shifting of the entirety, I mean, maybe large portions of the kingdom, and aligning those mindsets, or even the loyalties, if you may, towards a new, again going to call him false king, essentially, right? That probably was the one thing that he considered. And yes, surely the collateral was on his mind for sure. I think he understood quite well that the long-term strategy that Absalom had played has really captured the entirety of the kingdom, and I think that collateral could have been quite large if he didn't take the decision. So, any other points before we move forward, just for the interest of time? Okay, so I'll keep moving here. Please stop me if you want to. So I just want to explore what's really happening with David, right? So let's look at this, right? So maybe right from 12, where this is account between David now talking to to Nathan, right? So 12:10, he's literally being said that therefore the sword shall never depart from your house. These are the predictions, that's been made by Nathan, right? Because you have despised me, this is God, and have taken the wife of Uriah Hittite to be your wife. That's one thing. Second is, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, right? Third is, and of course, we also know that how the firstborn of David with Bathsheba, right, was afflicted by a sickness, and he was dead. Even though David was praying for the child, it did not help. The seventh day, the child had died, right? And of course, we have other sons and daughters having this effect, right? David's firstborn, Amnon, rapes his half sister Tamar. Absalom, obviously, the thirdborn, kills. Now, look at it from a standpoint of a human being. Look at it from a standpoint of a father, a husband, right? What kind of a mindset David is in, right? This is like literally the waves and waves of uh, very, very traumatic incidences that is happening with David. I mean, losing child is not easy, right? I mean, and of course, within the family itself, somebody raping somebody else, and somebody else killing that person, and they're all firstborn sons and daughters, right? This is just really, his mindset or his circumstances at that time is just horrendous. I mean, we would not wish this on our worst of enemies, I would say. This should not come to anybody, right? And that's where, as a human being, right? I mean, he's an anointed king, but as a human being, he is suffering through this. He does trust God in this as well, right? He understands. So I think that was seen when he lost his firstborn, right? He was crying and praying, and then he was, he went ahead and said, "Okay, baby is dead. That's the decision of God. I'm accepting it," right? So in all these, he's sticking on to God's grace, right? But we cannot say that this is impervious about all of these things happening around him. This is not playing, or maybe he's not playing with a full deck, as they say, right? He may not be the same strategist, same level of warrior, same set of mindset, who has won so many wars, who's been clever and sending out spies. He's not there. He's literally not there. So for us to entertain the thought that why don't he just stay back and fight? Of course, over and above the collateral bit, he's not the king that he was, or at least the circumstances don't give us the feeling that he's really there, right? That's one thing. And then, of course, I just jot down some of the potential reasons, right? So as I said, David, as soon as he heard that his advisor was now with Absalom, and then of course this claim from Absalom, right? He literally said, okay, he had to leave, right? And that's because he, in a way, does understands the fact that this is God's judgment upon him. He understands that even though he's right with God because of his acceptance of his sin, because he is cried before God, he's saved, he's not killed, but the consequence he has to suffer. So he understands that. That's one thing over and above what I said in the previous slide, right? David also knew that this thing is coming. Nathan has already given him given him these messages, right? He has already told him this is going to happen in the future, right? But when it happens, it crushes him because of the fact that it's not an outside enemy who is destroying him and his household. It's literally his son and his most trusted advisor. That's not easy to consume, right? I mean, think about it, right? You and me, we read it as a story, but if you actually apply that and see if something like that happens to us, right? I mean, we are always careful about somebody from outside coming in and destroying our lives, and here is his own son from within just literally eating away the entirety of his kingdom, right? That's too much to consume, I would say, right? David understands that Absalom had amassed large support as well, right? He understood that his long-term game, 4 years, right? He has been at it. He understood immediately that that has definitely, and of course, he has to react in that. I don't know what's the timeline, but obviously, he doesn't have 4 years to strategize against Absalom, right? So he almost like saying that Absalom has a 4-year run, start ahead, right? Essentially, to win to when before he decides to actually claim his kingdom, right? And of course, I think we already talked about the collaterals, right? I mean, if you're in this situation from mindset wise, from a strategy wise, right, you have too much to lose, right? I think he rather thought like he will take away his people and kingdom and just maybe fight again and another day, and he did so, right? So one of the key points I want to say here is like when he left actually 10 concubines right behind to protect his palace. Now that to me really talks about how he always intended to come back, right? It's not just fleeing and just for good. It was almost symbolic and saying that, okay, I still have my stake over here in my palace. I'm going to come back. Same as our God, God is supposed to come back and he will come back, right? So we can still continue to draw the parallels between what's happening with David here in the Old Testament versus what's in the New Testament, right? Okay, so time check, 15 minutes, I think. Are we still okay, Manu, to maybe proceed into a quick breakout session?
Yeah, we have 15 minutes. Maybe we can have.
Okay. So the context is, of course, there's a big thing about loyalty in chapter 15, and I think I did not cover a lot of that portion where he comes out of, Jerusalem, and who are the people who actually stick to him in this. And it's a really, really tough situation, right? No clarity of the future, so we can see what David's officials did. Ittai the Gittite, right? And David's, people who decide to become David's spies, essentially. So that's where he turns back into becoming the old David, where he is now strategizing, now thinking what he needs to do and all that, right? So clearly, we have the question is really around how do we measure loyalty, right? Especially for when we are loyal to people who are placed in our lives, right? What metrics do we use? How do we know that we are loyal enough to the people that we are with? And is there anything that this, as I said, David's officials, the Gittites, as well as the priest Zadok and his family, right? Hoshai, right? All these folks who have become the spies for David. What do they have? Why do they do that? Because you are now tagging yourself along somebody who has zero future. He doesn't know where he is going. He's not a king anymore. He has been overthrown, or at least for practical reasons, he's been overthrown. Why do you still stick to it? And as a matter of fact, Gittites are not, as I said, Philistines, right? I mean, the Ittai is a Philistine. He's not an Israelite either. He was a pagan. He has come along with David, but he doesn't need to stay with David, but he decides to. So that's really the question. We can go into the breakout session for. All right. Okay, no worries. For the interest of time, I'll have a just last slide. So I think why I brought up the point of loyalty, right? It's intriguing to me, our own behaviors, right? Especially amid adversity, right? When adversity happens to us, and how we channelize loyalty at that point, right? Whether it is to or from, right? And who are we loyal to, and who do we show our loyalty to, right? We really, it gets challenged, it gets strained, if you may, right? And I think I just want to leave you with the, very popular story of Ruth, right? And Naomi. I think, talk about some downtrodden situations, right? I think Naomi lost her husband, two sons, both Ruth and the other daughter-in-law also lost, obviously, their husbands. It's a famine that's going on in the country. They are going, so obviously, at that point, how Ruth shows her loyalty to Naomi is just amazing to me, right? Again, this is a scenario where they're not sure about future, and most of the time in the real world, what we see at least is that we attach ourselves, or at least see people attaching themselves to people and places and organizations which are going places, right? Which are going to bigger and better places, right? We don't necessarily see loyalty being as strong when it is adversity all around, right? We don't seem to fall back on, or at least express our loyalty, especially even to God, right? Sometimes when it's absolutely adverse situations, right? I think in this case, Ruth's reply is amazing to me again, right? And so Naomi was trying to tell her to go back to her place. She's a Moabite, not an Israelite even, right? She was telling her to go back to her home, and so essentially she says, "Stop urging me to abandon you, right? For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God," right? I think a similar Hittite also essentially expressed the same thing. So David was telling him to go back because he's actually a foreigner, and even he says, you are here just for a little while, right? You're not here since ever. This is not your fight. You don't have to lose your life because there is a possibility of that, and you can go back. And the Hittite essentially, um, Ittai, for that matter, sorry, essentially said the same thing as Ruth said, right? Whether it is life or death, I'm with you. And how does that happen when you have the real God's own people, Israelites, aligning themselves to Absalom? And here is a quote unquote, at some point, a pagan person who is understanding who is the real king, and who is able to be steadfast and be loyal in this exceptionally. And of course, he had ownership of 600 men as well, right? So he brought them also within the mix, and he said, "Wherever you go, I go," right? And to me, that's really the, I don't want to say it's a metric, but at least that's where it gets tested. It's easy to be loyal when everything is okay. It's not easy to be loyal when things are not exactly how you think it should be, right? Second thing I want to leave you with is Psalms 3. This is exactly the Psalms that David wrote while he was fleeing away from Absalom, right? And he's saying that how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and my lifter of head. I cried out loud to you, Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill, right? So in the most adverse situation, right, David understands God is always loyal. And that's the thing we tend to forget sometimes, especially the temptation of easy fixes, going after false kings. We forget the fact that all you need is Jesus. All you need is our God. We tend to go after that easy fix. We get impressed by people and missions and fast talking and slick people. They can be very impressive, but that's falsehood. The fact that that was falsehood almost 900 BC when this events were happening, that's a falsehood today is just mind-boggling to me, right? I mean, these are the things we see in everyday life. Chapter 15 is something for us to really absorb, be smart, be a smart Christian, I guess, right? That's really one thought I want to leave with. Be educated, right? Be educated and always understand these deceptions are around the corner all the time, every time. And it is incumbent on us as Christians to make sure that we see through those deceptions and be loyal to the only God, the living God that we have. Thank you.